How did David and I meet? That's a big question. I don't know if you have the time for it.
Sophie and I met in 2014.
The year is 2010. David has no recollection of it. I'm 16 years old. David is 18 years old. He's just moved to the Baha'i World Center to volunteer on his gap year, and I am there with my family on pilgrimage. The only things I remember from meeting him was that he was wearing a gray shirt, he had a backpack on, and he had this energy that made him seem kind of like a puppy. Just excited, happy, enthusiastic. Other than that, I didn't really think about it. And we can kind of fast forward to 2014 when the story really begins.
I was on a 3-day visit back to Haifa, Israel, where I used to live when I was 18.
I was with a few of my best friends, and one of my best friends in that group happened to know David from David's study abroad in London.
My friend Nathan was also visiting Israel at the time, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, let's hang out. I see Nathan, he's with this group of people, and one of them is this girl. She had short hair. I introduced myself. We talked for a couple minutes. You know, we go our separate ways. The next day, I see Nathan again. So I go up to the group, see this girl with short hair, and I introduce myself, and she's like, we met yesterday, I'm Sophie. The next day, the same thing happened. So basically the first 2 times I saw her after initially meeting her, I had forgotten that I had met her.
It was a humbling experience, let's just say that. I followed David on Instagram and Facebook. It was a really cool Instagram. But that was kind of it. I really didn't think about David much in those next 2 years.
2 or 3 weeks after I'd gotten back from Haifa, I started having these like really vivid dreams where Sophie would just like appear in the dream. The first one I had was me in this grocery store, wandering through the aisles, like grabbing some stuff, and then I saw Sophie Rutstein from New York. Like, I don't dream about things, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't have memorable dreams. A couple weeks goes by, I have another dream that's like as innocuous as that one. This basically just kept happening over and over with these dreams that just felt like they were more and more and more intense. I had this like aversion to this idea of being someone who developed feelings for someone else through a dream. It just seemed so creepy, but it just kept happening. Eventually that turned into noticing her on social media and like thinking about her during the day. If there's any bit of advice I've learned from any of this, it's like, you really need to be skeptical of this kind of thing, because I have insignificant dreams all the time, and it's easy to confuse something that might be like some kind of inclination or sign or something with a dream that means nothing. There was one point I was in Haifa, Israel in the dream, and I just remember Sophie being by my side. We were completely alone on these terraces. The shrine was behind us. We were walking uphill, and I felt totally at peace. I think back to it right now, like I can experience that dream as if it was a memory. It was so frustrating to be thinking about this girl and developing feelings for this girl and getting all these, what I was starting to think of as like signs through my dreams, and then being like, that doesn't happen, you're being an idiot.
The only communication we had during those 2 years was David saying happy birthday to me on Facebook Messenger and me not responding. Throughout that time, I was getting to know a lot of different people. I had always been really, really interested in getting married. It's because my parents are a shining example for me of marriage. Since I was a teen, I've been obsessed with replicating that and, entering into my own marriage, because what I've seen from my parents is so happy. Fast forward to 2016, he writes to me again on Facebook Messenger and says he's going to be staying at my apartment.
I'm in Austin, Texas. We're at South by Southwest. I asked my bandmate or my managers, because they would like route all the tours and they would figure out accommodations and I would handle like the tech stuff. I was like, oh, where are we staying when we're in New York? I was like, oh, we're staying at Tarana's place. I'm like, oh, cool, hanging out with Tarana. And then one of them was like, oh yeah, and like her roommate, Sophie Rutstein? And she's like, yeah. And once I heard that Sophie was her roommate, I was freaking out. I could just imagine walking into Sophie's apartment and her just looking at me and just knowing that I'm this like creep who's been having dreams about her.
David messages me and tells me he's going to be staying on my couch. And I think, cool, I'm not going to be there for part of the time. I was visiting somebody who at the time I thought for sure I was going to be marrying. So I didn't think much of it. I was like, all right, cool, this guy and his band are going to stay at our apartment. I'm not going to be there for half of the trip.
So I'm like, okay, like as long as these other things were signs, like that's a sign, nothing. Like I need to just push this out of my mind.
What I didn't know was that trip would end up being the trip where we broke up. I remember I was in the airport waiting to board my flight back to New York, and it became clear we would need to break up. And that flight back to New York was horrendous. I was sobbing. Okay, editing Sophie jumping in really quick. I feel like I'm being kind of cavalier. That doesn't reflect the reality of the situation. That breakup was the most painful thing I had ever experienced. The pain lasted for many, many years, and to be honest, is still tender. And I just think it's important to clarify for anyone who's watching this who might be going through something similar, who might be going through a painful breakup, because now that I can contextualize it as pain that I experienced as a precursor to meeting David, that has been really helpful for me. And it's only now with the distance that I can do that, but it's important to clarify like how heartbroken I was when I met David, kind of what state I was in when I came upon him again. I was sobbing so hard that the flight attendant came over to me, handed me a full box of tissues and said, "I don't know what happened, but I hope you're okay." And I couldn't even explain myself. I just continued to sob, thanked her through the sobs, and that was kind of the state I was in when I came back to New York. And I texted my roommate, so-and-so and I just broke up. I'm a mess, like, just so you know. I was in a place where I did not care who saw me crying. So when my roommate told me that these people were gonna be staying at our house, I was like, I don't care. Honestly, I don't care.
She walks in and her voice is really hoarse and her face is kind of swollen, and she sees Taranet, her roommate, and just bursts into tears and goes over and hugs her. Yeah, after like 5 or 6 minutes, she just gets up. It's like 8 p.m. and she just goes into her bedroom and doesn't come out for the rest of the night. Because
I was in such a state, I didn't stay around for long. I like booked it to my bedroom. But the one thing that stood out to me was that David felt buoyant. I guess that's the only way I can describe it. Again, it was that same feeling I had had in 2010 when I first met him. Like he was just light, almost like bouncing on his feet. And I was coming in with the exact opposite. I was like heavy and dark and sad. I think at that point, David felt like, okay, I've made a huge mistake. This girl is clearly not into me and is not in a place to get to know anybody.
Then we play the second show, and it's like my least favorite show of the tour. I was probably just nervous. It probably was fine, but
I miss it. I miss watching him on stage.
Yeah, after that, we go back to Brooklyn. We're all like hanging out in the room together. And again, after like 10, 15 minutes, she gets up and goes to her room.
This was a much better hangout. Like I feel like I got to know David quite a bit better, but we were eating strawberries, and what I didn't know at the time is that I had developed an allergy to strawberries.
She had broken out in hives without anybody noticing, and she just like went to her bedroom and didn't say anything about it. So I was like, that was it.
I thought, oh, I'm breaking out in hives because I'm like emotionally not in a good place. Like remember, I had just gone through this breakup the night before. So without telling anybody, I like slip away into my bedroom.
We leave New York, and that's that.
But David wrote a message to me and my roommate thanking us for letting him and his band stay at our apartment. I had this very specific thought. My brother is one of the sweetest, kindest people I know. I don't know if he would have written a thank you message after staying at somebody's house. And I thought, wow, it really says a lot about David. What I didn't realize at the time was that he was hardcore crushing on me, and he sent that thank you note because he was crushing, not because he's just a good person. But anyway, it did have an impact on me, and we added each other on Snapchat.
Like of all apps, Snapchat, like the worst app for texting. It deletes the text. You have to save them manually if you want to keep them. You open the app at the time, and it just opens to the camera. So it eats up all your battery, and I'm on this crappy like 2014 iPhone 6 or something.
I remember sitting in one of my classes at NYU. I was on Snapchat. Great student. I looked at his story, and it was like a funny t-shirt he had taken a picture of, and I just responded, haha. We continued chatting on Snapchat like rapid fire for the next 8 months, basically. Maybe a couple days or a week or so into texting. Like I can sense that there's chemistry here, but I had just had this big breakup. I was not ready to enter into another relationship. What I realized was that I had entered into relationships very quickly. There wasn't enough of a basis of friendship. So when it started to become clear that those relationships were not compatible, I was already head over heels. I was in love. I was gone. I was not paying attention to those incompatibilities. So I had made a decision for myself that I was going to be friends for a significant amount of time with the next person that I wanted to get to know. And that was David.
By this point, I'm in London. I wake up to the Snapchat message saying, hey, it's been really fun writing with you, but I just want to establish clearly that this is a friendship. We're friends. I was kind of like, oh man, like I was getting excited about this. Within like a minute, it was very clear to me that that was 100% the right move because it took all the pressure and ambiguity out of it and we could just like hang out.
I think I knew that that was hard to hear, but it was what I needed to do at the moment, and it allowed us to just like truly get to know each other. We got on so well. My mom even asked me one day, she said, who is that person that makes you smile at your phone so much? I had just like written him off, kind of. We got along so well that it in my head registered as just a friendship. And that was another thing that was a pattern that I needed to break. I had been in some relationships that were really deep, but were also very complex. And I started to conflate the two of those. As I was getting to know David and it was very light and joyful, I thought, oh, well, it's lacking depth or it's not serious enough. And I was really wrong. He taught me like a relationship can be deep and it can be really light at the same time. Throughout those 8 months, I should say that we had kind of stopped talking at certain points because I was getting kind of swept up in other connections that I had.
When she stopped writing to me, I was like, maybe this meant more to me than it meant to her. Yeah, it was just this feeling of like, oh, I got too into this. I was the one who got left with the hot potato, and maybe she just didn't care about me as much. I wasn't as good of a friend to her as she was to me. And so by that point, I was like, okay, I need to be a little bit more protective of myself.
I know now that was really hurtful for David. I didn't at the time.
I had another dream. This was like the last really burning, significant dream that I had, where I was in her parents' house and she wasn't home. And her parents were like, oh, she'll be home soon. But I knew that I had to leave soon. So it was like this weird thing of like every minute that goes by is a minute less I'm going to have with her. And I woke up from that dream and I had this feeling that like, okay, if the opportunity presents itself, if we're physically anywhere close to each other, I'm going to tell her, hey, I have feelings for you. Even if they're not reciprocated, like, that's it. Like, I just need to tell you that. And at one point, like, I even wrote this like page-long letter that I thought I was going to send to her, and it basically said, hey, this is how I feel about you. I'm like going back and forth in my mind. I'm like, would that be really weird and set a really weird tone if she didn't feel the same way? Like, would that throw things off? And obviously it would, but I don't have much experience. Like, I'm not good with this kind of thing. And I sit down with my friend Sean one day in Sydney. We take a look at it together. I just remember he, in the simplest and kindest way, said something along the lines of, I think you should just be in the same room with her and see how you feel before you say that. And I was like, oh, duh, like, I need to spend time with her to understand if, like, we even have chemistry in person.
February 2017, David came back to New York on another tour. It was clear to both of us that there was something there. We made sure that we had plans to see each other as much as possible. Both of us made sacrifices to spend time together. Like, I was in Maine, actually, for the beginning of his trip in New York, and I came home early so that I could spend more time with him. And he was on tour, obviously. He had commitments and things he needed to do, but he made sure that we had big chunks of time together. I think that was important. Like, both of us are willing to make sacrifices and concessions because we wanted to figure it out. We wanted to see what was there. So I came home that first night from Maine. I was so nervous. Oh my God, I was sweating. It was just the sweetest evening. We just had so much to talk about. When I think about that night, I just see both of us like beaming, like grinning ear to ear. This time, both of us were buoyant. You could physically feel it. There was one day where we spent the day around NYU in the West Village, and we ended up in Bobst in the NYU library, and we were in these like squeaky swivel chairs, and we were just like looking at each other.
I had no nerves. I was just like, all right, let's go time. We sat down at this table, and I looked across at her and like, should we talk about this? And she started like laughing and also gave me a look like, yeah, we should talk about this. And I was like, okay, well, I'll go first.
I was like, okay. And I felt so much stress as soon as he said that. Like, I don't know what I feel.
I think I said something like, I'm pretty into you. which was maybe less direct, but yeah, got the job done.
It was so cute and is very characteristic of David. Like, David to me feels like he's just young in like the best ways possible. Not that he's immature, but he just like embodies a playful spirit. David opened up to me at this point about the dreams that he had been having and kind of laid it all out there on the table for me. I felt very distinctly like this is preordained in some way. I had never felt that feeling ever before.
I remember at one point, like, I go to the bathroom before we leave the library, and I just catch a look of myself in the mirror, and I'm like, you did it, dude. Like, you did it.
So end of February to end of June, we dated. End of June to end of December was our engagement.
Well, we got engaged 4 months after we started dating, and married 9 months after we started dating. Again, wild, but like, it somehow was the most easy and natural thing. And in fact, I would have married her sooner, and I would have been engaged for shorter.
I'm so grateful. One of the things that is a real protection I feel in the Baha'i faith is needing consent from all like living parents or guardians. And I really trust my parents. They take consent really, really seriously. So when they met David, they felt really good about David and about how I was around David. And the whole relationship was just really easy and simple. David and I turn to each other all the time and we're just like, what? How did we get this lucky?
Here we are, 4 1/3 years in to our marriage, and it's better than ever.
I told you it was long.
I barely looked at the camera at all. I was just like, my eyes were just like kind of like, I don't know, I was like this, and I think I was like, I don't know, this, and...
Take me.
I love you.
I love you.
Lucky me.